Our Cozy Mystery presentation today is brought to you by the Cozy Mystery Sleuth Society. I invite you to sit back and enjoy our Northwoods mystery. Our story is set in the picturesque resort setting in northern Wisconsin in the town called Havenwood. Thanks for watching and listening. Let's begin.
Disclaimer. This short story is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to a place, a person, or persons or historical event is purely coincidence. Dedication. This story is dedicated to two real people and friends, Mike and Linda. Mike and Linda live in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. They find great pleasure in walking the shoreline of Lake Superior in northern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. May they always enjoy the peace and harmony that nature brings their way. May they find surprise and joy in discovering precious agates along their pathway. And may the amazing sunsets of the Northwoods bring them gratitude and love together. The Agate Agony, a Havenwood Northwoods murder mystery. Chapter 1, Shattered Morning. The morning air carried a symphony of birdsong as the sun peeked over the pine-laden hills of Havenwood, Wisconsin. A dusting of frost clung to the storefronts lining Main Street. Among those shops, Agatha's Agates and Jewelry stood out with its charming blue awning and displays of polished gemstones. Inside, Agatha Rockton, a woman with a warm smile and eyes that sparkled like the Lake Superior agates she adored, was arranging a new shipment of stones. Her nimble fingers caressed the smooth surfaces of the agates, each one a unique treasure from the shores she and her husband, Robert, had combed countless times. Robert Rockton, a burly man with a passion for fishing, was a few doors down at Havenwood Hook, Line, and Sinker. His weathered hands, adept at crafting unique lures from the driftwood he found on their shoreline adventures, were now busy restocking shelves. He was often heard exclaiming, when asked if his driftwood lures really worked, "Fish are dumb. You could glue hooks on a cell phone and cast it in the water, and if the fish is hungry enough, it will bite." Robert would let out a sly grin and a chuckle and say, "But I don't suggest you do that. Just buy one of my lures and you can't go wrong. My driftwood lures are custom-made and painted by hand. You'll find no other lures like these anywhere in the Northwoods, guaranteed." His driftwood lures were works of art and famous among tourists and avid fishermen across the Northwoods of Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Lake Michigan. Agatha's and Robert's love story was woven into the fabric of Havenwood. They met as teenagers, bonding over their shared love for the Northwoods, Lake Superior, and agate hunting. Countless mornings found them, taking the short drive north from Havenwood, strolling together along the shoreline, Agatha's eyes scanning the pebbles for agates. Robert was always searching for the perfect piece of driftwood for his next lure creation. Their love was as enduring as the ancient rocks that lined the shores, a testament to the simple beauty of shared passions and a life lived in harmony with nature. This morning, Agatha hummed a cheerful tune as she adjusted a display of necklaces in the back storage area of her store. The jingle of the bell above the door announced a customer, and she called out, "Good morning. Be right with you." Silence followed. Puzzled, Agatha stepped out from behind the shelves into the main showroom. "Hello?" she repeated, but there was no answer. A sudden chill ran down her spine. Before she could react, a thunderous crash echoed through the store. A massive box of polished agates weighing almost 1 pounds had dislodged from the top shelf in the storage room and toppled onto Agatha, burying her beneath a mountain of stones. Poor Agatha was literally stoned to death. Minutes later, Robert, his heart filled with anticipation for their daily coffee ritual and local gossip at the Daily Grind, strolled into Agatha's shop. His smile faded as he saw the overturned shelf and the scattered agates. "Agatha?" he called out, his voice trembling. Dread filled his gut as he rounded the corner and saw her lifeless form beneath the pile. A guttural cry escaped his lips as he rushed to her side, frantically trying to move the stones, but it was too late. His beloved Agatha was gone. In a daze, Robert stumbled out of the shop and into the street, his cries for help echoing through the quiet morning air. Reverend Sam Bennett, a close friend of the couple, and the pastor at the community church, heard the commotion as he was walking down the street. He quickly rushed to the scene. The sight that greeted him was one of utter devastation. He immediately called Sheriff Tom Granger, his voice thick with grief and disbelief. "Tom, You need to get down here to Agatha's store right away. Something terrible has happened." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the storefronts, a dark cloud of tragedy settled over Havenwood. The seemingly peaceful town was now the scene of a perplexing mystery, one that would test the bonds of friendship, reveal hidden secrets, and expose the darkness lurking beneath the surface of this idyllic Northwoods community. Chapter 2: Whispers of Suspicion. Sheriff Tom Granger, a tall, lanky man with a weathered face and keen eyes, arrived at Agatha's Agates and Jewelry with a heavy heart. He had known Agatha and Robert for years, and the news of her death had shaken him to his core. Stepping into the shop, he was met with a scene of chaos. The overturned shelf, the scattered agates, and the lingering scent of blood painted a grim picture. Reverend Sam Bennett, his face etched with sorrow, stood beside Robert, who was still in a state of shock. "Sheriff," Sam said, his voice barely a whisper, "this is just unthinkable." Tom nodded grimly and approached Robert, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Robert, I'm so sorry. Can you tell me anything about what happened?" Robert shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't know. I just came to get Agatha for coffee, and I found her like this." Tom surveyed the scene, his mind already racing through the possibilities. "It looks like an accident," he said, "but I'm going to need to investigate thoroughly. I'll need to talk to anyone who might have been in the store recently, or who might have had a reason to harm Agatha." Sam, his pastoral sleuthing instincts kicking in, offered to help. "I'll start making some calls, Tom. I'm sure the community will want to rally around Robert in this difficult time." As Sam left to spread the news and offer support, Tom began his investigation. He carefully examined the scene, taking note of the position of Agatha's body, the angle of the fallen shelf, and the distribution of the agates. Nothing seemed out of place, except for the fact that the heavy box of agates should have been more secure on the shelf. Tom then turned his attention to the potential suspects. The first person who came to mind was Carl Jensen, the owner of a rival jewelry store just down the block. Carl had a reputation for being competitive and jealous, and he had recently been involved in a heated argument with Agatha over a rare agate specimen. The second suspect was Marla Davis, a former employee of Agatha's who had been let go a few months earlier due to a gambling problem. Marla had always been envious of Agatha's success, and she had made several veiled threats before leaving the shop. The final suspect was Jim the Pike Peterson, a local fisherman known for his quick temper and love of agates. Jim had a habit of bartering with his agate finds for fishing supplies at Robert's shop. He had recently been pressuring Agatha to buy a large collection of stones from him. With these three individuals in mind, Tom set out to interview them, hoping to uncover any information that might shed light on Agatha's mysterious death. As he delved deeper into the lives of these Havenwood residents, he realized that the tranquil facade of the town hid a web of secrets, rivalries, and hidden motives. The whispers of suspicion had begun, and the search for the truth was about to uncover the dark underbelly of this seemingly idyllic community. Chapter 3: Hidden Motives. Sheriff Tom Granger's first stop was Jensen's Jewels, a store that exuded an air of pretentiousness compared to Agatha's down-to-earth charm. Carl Jensen, a thin, balding man with a perpetual scowl, greeted Tom with a forced politeness that barely masked his disdain. "Sheriff Granger," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Tom cut to the chase. "I'm investigating Agatha Rockton's death. I understand you two had a disagreement recently." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Disagreement? That's putting it mildly. The woman was a menace. She was constantly undercutting my prices, stealing my customers, and spreading rumors about my business." "Rumors?" Tom inquired, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, rumors," Carl spat. "She told everyone I was selling fake agates, that my stones were imported from China. It's slander, I tell you." Tom took note of Carl's agitation. "Were you in the store this morning?" "Hardly," Carl scoffed. "I was at home, nursing a hangover. Ask my wife if you don't believe me." Tom thanked Carl for his time and made his way to Marla Davis's modest apartment. Marla, a disheveled woman with haunted eyes, answered the door with a look of surprise. "Sheriff Granger?" she stammered. "What can I do for you?" "I'm investigating Agatha Rockton's death," Tom explained. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Marla invited Tom inside and offered him a cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Agatha, dead?" she whispered. "I can't believe it." Tom gently questioned Marla about her relationship with Agatha. Marla admitted to feeling resentful after being fired, but she denied having any involvement in Agatha's death. "I may have said some things I didn't mean," she confessed, "but I would never hurt Agatha. She was like a mentor to me." Tom's final visit was to Jim, the Pike Peterson's lakeside cabin. Jim, a burly man with a bushy beard and a piercing gaze, answered the door with a fishing rod in hand. "Sheriff," he grunted, "what brings you out here?" Tom explained the situation, and Jim's face hardened. "Agatha's dead? That's a damn shame. She was a good woman." Tom inquired about Jim's recent interactions with Agatha and Robert. Jim admitted to trying to sell her a large collection of agates, but he claimed that Agatha had turned him down, saying she didn't have the funds. "I was disappointed," Jim admitted, "but I wouldn't hurt her over it. We had a good relationship." As Tom drove back to the station, he pondered the information he had gathered. Each suspect had a motive, but none of them had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, Reverend Sam had been busy making his rounds in the community. Through his pastoral visits, he learned that Agatha had been acting strangely in the days leading up to her death. She seemed preoccupied, anxious, and even a bit paranoid. One evening, Sam had overheard Agatha arguing with a mysterious figure in her shop. The voice was muffled, but Sam could tell it was a man. Agatha's voice was raised in anger, and she seemed to be accusing the man of something. The conversation ended abruptly, and the man left in a hurry. Sam hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, in light of Agatha's death, it seemed significant. He decided to share this information with Sheriff Tom, hoping it might lead them closer to the truth. As the sun began to set over Havenwood, the mystery surrounding Agatha's death deepened. The idyllic facade of the town was crumbling, revealing a hidden world of secrets and dark motives. The truth, it seemed, was buried deeper than the agates that had taken Agatha's life. Chapter 4: The Smuggler's Trail. Sheriff Tom Granger sat in his sparsely furnished office, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He stared at the photographs of the crime scene, his brow furrowed in concentration. Something didn't add up. The more he thought about it, the less likely it seemed that Agatha's death was a mere accident. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Deputy Johnson," he said when the line connected, "I need you to pull up any records of unusual activity around Agatha's agates and jewelry in the past few weeks. Specifically, any late-night deliveries or suspicious vehicles." After hanging up, Tom leaned back in his chair, a nagging feeling gnawing at his gut. He recalled Reverend Sam's words about Agatha's recent behavior, her anxiety, her paranoia, the hushed argument with an unknown man. It all pointed to something more sinister than a random accident. Later that day, Deputy Johnson called back with some intriguing information. "Sheriff," he said, "we found some security footage from a nearby store that shows a van pulling up to Agatha's shop late at night on several occasions. The van is registered to a local fishing charter company, but the driver's face is obscured." Tom's interest piqued. "Fishing charter company, you say? Any known connections to Agatha or the suspects?" "Not that we've found yet," Johnson replied. "But I'm digging deeper." Tom thanked Johnson and hung up, a new lead forming in his mind. Could there be a connection between the mysterious van and Agatha's death? He decided to pay a visit to the fishing charter company the following day. The next morning, Tom drove to the docks, where the charter company's boats were moored. He found the owner, a gruff man named Captain Jack, tinkering with an outboard motor. "Captain Jack?" Tom asked, flashing his badge. "Sheriff Tom Granger. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your van." Captain Jack eyed Tom warily. "What about it?" "We have reason to believe it was seen near Agatha Rockton's shop late at night," Tom explained. "Can you tell me why?" Captain Jack shrugged. "I use the van for deliveries, supplies for the boats, that sort of thing. Maybe one of my employees borrowed it for personal use." Tom pressed further, asking about the employees and their schedules. Captain Jack grew increasingly defensive, denying any knowledge of illicit activities. As Tom turned to leave, he noticed something peculiar. A stack of crates, covered with a tarp, sat on the dock. They looked heavy. and the tarp bulged in places, as if concealing something large and irregular. Tom's instincts told him there was more to this than met the eye. He made a mental note to investigate the fishing charter company further. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering a much larger operation than he had initially anticipated. A smuggling ring, perhaps, using the fishing charter as a front. And if so, what did it have to do with Agatha's death? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly starting to come together, but the full picture remained shrouded in mystery. The trail of the smugglers was leading Tom deeper into the shadows of Havenwood, and he knew that the truth, when it finally emerged, would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 5. A Cryptic Clue. The following morning, Reverend Sam Bennett found himself drawn back to Agatha's agates and jewelry. The shop was closed, but Sam had a key, given to him by Robert in case of emergencies. Stepping inside, he was once again struck by the heavy silence that hung in the air, a stark contrast to Agatha's usual cheerful atmosphere. He made his way to the back room, where the shelves lay in disarray. As he surveyed the scene, his eyes were drawn to a glint of metal beneath a pile of agates. He crouched down and carefully moved the agates aside, revealing a small, tarnished locket. Sam picked up the locket, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a simple design, a heart-shaped pendant with intricate Celtic knotwork. He opened it with trembling fingers, half expecting to find a photograph of Agatha and Robert. Instead, a folded piece of paper fell out. Sam unfolded it and read the cryptic message written in Agatha's elegant handwriting. "The truth lies hidden where the light dances on the water." Sam stared at the note, a wave of confusion washing over him. What did it mean? Where was the light dancing on the water? He racked his brain, trying to decipher the cryptic message. Suddenly, a memory flashed through his mind. One afternoon, while having tea with Agatha, she had pointed out a peculiar feature in her shop, a small, round window set high on the wall above the back counter. The window was angled in such a way that it caught the afternoon sun, casting a shimmering reflection on the wall opposite. Sam rushed to the counter and looked up at the window. It was indeed catching the sunlight, creating a dazzling display of dancing light on the wall. He followed the reflection to its source and noticed a loose brick in the wall. With a surge of adrenaline, he pried the brick loose, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside the compartment was a worn, leather-bound journal. Sam carefully removed it, his hands shaking with excitement. He knew this journal held the key to unraveling the mystery surrounding Agatha's death. He quickly returned to his church and began to read. The journal was filled with Agatha's innermost thoughts, hopes, and fears. But as Sam delved deeper into its pages, he stumbled upon a shocking revelation. Agatha had been involved in the agate smuggling ring that Sheriff Tom was investigating. She had been using her jewelry store as a front to launder the smuggled fake stones. Sam's heart sank as he read Agatha's confessions of guilt and remorse. She had been drawn into the illegal operation out of desperation, hoping to save her struggling business. But the deeper she became involved, the more danger she faced. The final entry in the journal, dated the day before her death, sent a shiver down Sam's spine. Agatha wrote of a confrontation with an unknown person, someone she feared for her life. She had resolved to expose the smuggling ring and bring down those responsible, but she was running out of time. Sam closed the journal, his mind reeling. He now knew the truth about Agatha's secret life, but the question remained: who was the mysterious person she had feared? And had they played a role in her untimely demise? The cryptic clue had led Sam to a startling revelation, but the path to justice was far from clear. He knew he had to share this information with Sheriff Tom, but he also knew that it would shatter Robert's image of his beloved wife. With a heavy heart, Sam made his way to the sheriff's office, the journal clutched tightly in his hand. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be revealed. Chapter 6. Unmasking the Past. Sheriff Tom Granger listened intently as Reverend Sam recounted his discovery of the hidden journal and its shocking revelations. The usually jovial pastor's face was etched with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I never would have suspected Agatha of such a thing," Tom confessed, shaking his head in disbelief. "She always seemed so honest, so trustworthy." Sam sighed. The journal paints a picture of a woman caught in a desperate situation. She was struggling to keep her business afloat, and she made a terrible mistake by getting involved with those criminals. Tom tapped his fingers on his desk, deep in thought. This changes everything. We need to reevaluate our suspects and focus on who might have been blackmailing Agatha or who had a motive to silence her. He picked up the journal and began to leaf through its pages, his eyes scanning the entries for any clues that might lead them to Agatha's killer. A name jumped out at him. Captain Jack. Agatha had written about several late-night meetings with him, during which he pressured her to participate in the smuggling operation. She also mentioned a growing sense of fear, as if she knew her life was in danger. Tom looked up at Sam. We need to pay another visit to Captain Jack. This time, we'll confront him with the evidence. The two men drove back to the docks, a sense of urgency propelling them forward. As they approached the charter company's office, they noticed a commotion on the dock. Captain Jack was arguing with one of his employees, a young man named Danny. Tom and Sam parked the car and approached the scene. Danny looked agitated, his face flushed with anger. Captain Jack, on the other hand, seemed strangely calm, his eyes cold and calculating. "What's going on here?" Tom demanded. Captain Jack turned to face him, a smirk playing on his lips. "Just a minor disagreement with my employee," he said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about, Sheriff." Tom narrowed his eyes. "I'm not so sure about that. We have reason to believe you're involved in illegal activities, Captain. Smuggling, to be precise." Captain Jack's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of barely concealed rage. "You have no proof," he growled. Tom pulled out Agatha's journal and held it up. "Actually, we do. We found this in a hidden compartment in Agatha's shop. It details your involvement in the smuggling ring as well as your threats against her." Captain Jack's face paled. He glanced at Danny, who now looked terrified. "You're bluffing," Captain Jack said, his voice trembling slightly. "Am I?" Tom retorted. "We also have security footage of your van at Agatha's shop late at night, and those crates on the dock, I'm willing to bet they're filled with smuggled agates." Captain Jack's facade finally crumbled. He lunged at Tom, but Sam quickly intervened, restraining the burly fisherman. Deputy Johnson, who had been waiting nearby, rushed over and handcuffed Captain Jack. As they led Captain Jack away, Tom turned to Danny. "You're free to go, son, but I suggest you find a new line of work." Danny nodded silently, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. He had been caught in a web of deceit, lured by the promise of easy money. But now, thanks to Agatha's journal and the tireless efforts of Sheriff Tom and Reverend Sam, the truth had been revealed, and justice was finally within reach. Chapter 7. The Bait and the Switch. With Captain Jack in custody, Sheriff Tom and Reverend Sam returned to the sheriff's office, their minds buzzing with the implications of Agatha's journal. They carefully reviewed the entries, piecing together a timeline of events and identifying key players in the smuggling ring. "It seems like Agatha was getting in over her head," Tom mused, tapping a pencil against his desk. She was clearly conflicted about her involvement, but she was also too afraid to back out. Sam nodded in agreement. "We need to find a way to use this information to our advantage. We need to lure the real killer into the open." Tom pondered for a moment, then a sly grin spread across his face. "I think I have an idea. It's a bit of a gamble, but it just might work." The following day, news of Captain Jack's arrest and the discovery of the smuggling ring spread like wildfire through Havenwood. The town was in an uproar, with everyone speculating about who else might be involved. Meanwhile, Tom and Sam put their plan into action. They leaked a false rumor that Agatha's journal had been stolen from the sheriff's office and was now in the hands of an anonymous informant. They also hinted that the journal contained damning evidence against other members of the smuggling ring. The bait was set, and now they waited for the fish to bite. As the days passed, tension in Havenwood reached fever pitch. Suspicions and accusations flew back and forth, with everyone eyeing their neighbors with distrust. The smugglers, fearing exposure, were growing increasingly desperate. One evening, as Tom and Sam were discussing the case in the sheriff's office, the phone rang. Tom picked up the receiver, a frown creasing his brow. "Sheriff Granger," he answered. A disguised voice crackled through the line. "I know who has the journal," the voice said. Meet me at the old lighthouse at midnight. Come alone. Tom glanced at Sam, a silent understanding passing between them. This was their chance. The killer was taking the bait. At midnight, under the cloak of darkness, Tom drove to the abandoned lighthouse on the outskirts of town. The wind howled around the dilapidated structure, and the waves crashed against the rocky shore. Tom stepped out of his car, his hand resting on his holstered gun. He approached the lighthouse cautiously, his senses on high alert. As he rounded the corner, a figure emerged from the shadows, their face obscured by a hood. The figure lunged at Tom, a knife glinting in the moonlight. A struggle ensued, the two wrestling on the ground, their grunts and curses echoing through the night. Suddenly, the figure cried out in pain as Sam, who had been hiding nearby, tackled them from behind. The hood fell back, revealing the face of a familiar figure, Marla Davis. Marla, her eyes wild with desperation, struggled to break free from Sam's grasp. "You'll never prove anything," she screamed. Tom, catching his breath, stood over Marla, his gun trained on her. "It's over, Marla," he said calmly. "You're under arrest for the murder of Agatha Rockton." Chapter 8. A Desperate Gambit. Handcuffed and disheveled, Marla Davis was led into the Havenwood Sheriff's Department. Her defiance had evaporated, replaced by a sullen resignation. As she sat in the interrogation room, the weight of her actions pressed down on her. Sheriff Tom Granger and Reverend Sam Bennett sat across from her, their faces etched with a mixture of sadness and disgust. "Marla," Tom began, his voice stern yet compassionate, "we know you killed Agatha. We have the journal, the security footage, and now your confession." Marla's eyes darted nervously between the two men. "It was an accident," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to kill her." "An accident?" Sam retorted. "You pushed a 100-pound box of agates onto her. That's not an accident, Marla. It's murder." Marla hung her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was desperate," she sobbed. "I owed money to some dangerous people. Captain Jack promised to pay off my debts if I helped him with the smuggling operation. But Agatha found out, and she threatened to expose us. I panicked." Tom leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Marla's. "Who are these dangerous people, Marla? Who else was involved in the smuggling ring?" Marla hesitated, her fear battling with her desire to unburden herself. "I can't tell you," she whispered. "They'll kill me if I talk." Tom exchanged a knowing glance with Sam. Marla was still protecting someone powerful enough to instill such terror in her. Meanwhile, news of Marla's arrest spread through Havenwood like wildfire. Carl Jensen, the rival jeweler, was relieved to be cleared of suspicion, but he also felt a pang of guilt for his harsh words about Agatha. Jim the Pike Peterson, the fisherman, was shocked and saddened by the news, having always considered Marla a friend. Robert Rockton, still reeling from the loss of his wife, was overcome with a mixture of anger and sorrow. He couldn't believe that Marla, someone he had welcomed into his home, could be capable of such a heinous act. As the community grappled with the shocking turn of events, Sheriff Tom and Reverend Sam continued their investigation. They knew that Marla was just a pawn in a larger game, a game orchestrated by a cunning and ruthless mastermind. They had to uncover the identity of this mysterious figure before they could bring true justice to Havenwood. The stakes were higher than ever before. The killer, sensing that the net was closing in, was growing increasingly desperate. They knew that Marla's silence was their only protection, and they would do anything to ensure she remained silent. The race against time had begun, a desperate gambit to protect the truth and bring the real villain to justice. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. A palpable tension hung in the air of Havenwood. Marla Davis's arrest had sent shockwaves through the community, but it had also sparked a sense of unease. The townsfolk knew that the mastermind behind the smuggling ring was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Sheriff Tom Granger and Reverend Sam Bennett worked tirelessly, following up on every lead, every whisper of information. They knew that time was of the essence, that the killer would not remain idle for long. One evening, as Tom was reviewing the case files in his office, he received a call from an anonymous source. The voice on the other end of the line was distorted, but the message was clear. Marla Davis knows too much. She will be silenced. Tom's blood ran cold. The killer was making their move. He immediately alerted Deputy Johnson and rushed to the jail, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. As he pulled up to the jail, he saw a figure darting across the parking lot. Tom recognized the silhouette. It was Jim the Pike Peterson. He jumped out of his car and gave chase, his heart pounding in his chest. The chase led them through the back alleys of Havenwood, past darkened storefronts and silent houses. Jim, fueled by desperation and adrenaline, was surprisingly agile for his size. But Tom, driven by a fierce determination to protect Marla, refused to give up. Finally, Jim stumbled and fell, his body slamming against a brick wall. Tom lunged forward and pinned him to the ground, his gun pressed against Jim's temple. "It's over, Jim," Tom growled. "You're not going to hurt anyone else." Jim's eyes were wild with fear and rage. "Let me go," he snarled. "She deserves to die. She betrayed us all." Tom tightened his grip on Jim's arm. "Who is us, Jim? Who else is involved in this?" Jim spat in Tom's face. "You'll never get it out of me," he sneered. "You're too late. She's already dead." Meanwhile, back at the jail, Reverend Sam had been keeping vigil over Marla. He had been reading to her from the Bible, hoping to offer some solace in her final moments. As he read, he noticed a subtle change in Marla's demeanor. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held a glimmer of peace. "Reverend," she whispered, her voice barely a rasp, "I have something to tell you." Sam leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Marla's words tumbled out in a rush, a confession of guilt, remorse, and a final plea for forgiveness. She revealed the identity of the mastermind behind the smuggling ring, Carl Jensen. She explained how Carl had manipulated her, exploiting her weakness for gambling and promising her a way out of her financial troubles. He had used her to keep Agatha in line, threatening to expose her secret if she didn't cooperate. And when Agatha finally decided to come clean, Carl silenced her, framing Marla for the crime. Marla's confession was interrupted by a sharp gasp. Her eyes fluttered closed and her body went limp. The arrest and confession had been too much for her ailing body. In a moment of release, her heart failed and her life was over. Reverend Sam, his heart filled with sorrow, closed her eyes and said a silent prayer. He knew that justice had been served, but the cost had been devastating. As the news of Marla's death reached Tom, he felt a wave of anger and grief wash over him. He had failed to protect her, and now the true villain was still at large. But he also knew that Marla's confession had given him the final piece of the puzzle. It was time to bring Carl Jensen to justice. Chapter 10: Healing Havenwood. The trial of Carl Jensen was a somber affair. The courtroom was packed with Havenwood residents, their faces etched with a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief. The once respected jeweler, now exposed as a ruthless criminal, sat hunched in the defendant's chair, his eyes downcast. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Agatha's journal, Marla's confession, and the recovered smuggled agates painted a damning picture of greed, betrayal, and ultimately murder. The jury's verdict was swift, guilty on all charges. As the judge sentenced Carl to life in prison, a collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Justice had been served, but the wounds inflicted on Havenwood would take time to heal. In the weeks that followed, the town came together to mourn Agatha and celebrate her life. A memorial service was held at Reverend Sam Bennett's church, where friends and family shared stories of Agatha's kindness, generosity, and love for her community. Robert Rockton, though still grieving, found solace in the outpouring of support from his neighbors. He reopened his shop, Havenwood Hook, Line, and Sinker, and continued to craft his famous driftwood lures, each one a tribute to his beloved wife. The smuggling ring was dismantled, its members scattered or imprisoned. Captain Jack, consumed by guilt and remorse, cooperated with the authorities, providing valuable information that led to the arrest of other key players in the operation. The dark cloud that had hung over Havenwood began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and resilience. The townsfolk, once divided by suspicion and fear, now united in their shared grief and their determination to move forward. One sunny afternoon, Robert found himself walking along the Lake Superior shoreline, his pockets filled with agates he had collected in memory of Agatha. As he strolled along the familiar path, he noticed a young girl, her eyes sparkling with excitement, picking up a smooth, polished stone. "Look, Daddy," she exclaimed, holding up the agate for Ring, her father to see. "I've found a treasure." Robert smiled, a warmth spreading through his heart. The sight of the little girl reminded him of Agatha, her childlike wonder, and her endless fascination with the treasures of the Northwoods. He walked closer to the little girl and her father. Robert knelt beside the girl and gently took the agate from her hand. "This is a very special stone," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's called an agate, and it comes from the shores of this great lake. It's a symbol of strength, resilience, and the enduring beauty of nature." The girl's eyes widened with curiosity. "Can I keep it?" she asked. Robert nodded. "Of course, my dear, it's yours to treasure." As the girl skipped away, clutching her precious agate, Robert felt a sense of peace wash over him. The cycle of life continued, and the beauty of the Northwoods endured. The timeless waves of Lake Superior gently washed the shoreline, reminding Robert again of the many years of joy he and Agatha uncovered in their Northwoods homeland. Agatha's memory lived on in the hearts of those who loved her, and her spirit would forever dance on the waves of Lake Superior, whispering secrets to those who listened closely.